Tensions remain high in India's capital after riots erupt in the streets of Delhi. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C., and this is The Heat. After months of protests over a controversial citizenship law, India is now dealing with some of the worst violence in decades. More than 50 people were killed and hundreds injured in riots across Delhi. Witnesses say police were unwilling or unable to control the mobs and in some cases may have participated in the violence. Crowds set fire to thousands of properties, including schools, mosques, shops and homes. Police and paramilitary are now patrolling neighborhoods, but some Muslims say they're living in constant fear.
I don't feel safe here. I've been living here for the past 25 years, and there was no trouble. Hindus and Muslims were living harmoniously together. But someone obviously pointed out that this is a Muslim's house because the rioters came and damaged the mosque behind, and then came back to burn my house.
Our Hindu neighbors helped us during the riots. If not for my neighbors, I wouldn't be alive today. Even they were being beaten up.
Our Hindu neighbors really try to help us a lot, but at times like this, our faith is shaken. We never ever imagined that something like this would happen.
Well, for more now on the violence and the government's response, let's bring in our panel. From Delhi, Aditya Menon is a political editor at The Quint, an Indian news website. Here with us in the studio is Lalit Jha. He's the chief US correspondent for the Press Trust of India. Salman Anisoz is an economic development expert and the author of The Great Disappointment, How Narendra Modi Squandered a Unique Opportunity to Transform the Indian Economy. And Irfan Nuruddin is the director of the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council and a professor of Indian politics at Georgetown University. Thank you to all of you for joining us. Aditya Menon, let me start with you. As we've just reported, more than 50 people killed, hundreds injured. These kinds of riots and violence in India have taken place before, these communal riots, sectarian violence. But what triggered or sparked off this current spate of violence and how widespread is it?
I think the current state of violence can be traced to the protests against the Citizenship Amendment Act. I think the act in itself was seen as being discriminatory by Muslims because the act includes everyone except Muslims. So there were widespread protests by Muslims and various other communities on the streets across India. The BJP and many of the people associated with the Hindu right wing, they made some extremely hostile comments against these protesters, and there were a number of hate speeches by members of the ruling BJP directed at these Muslim protesters. Especially during the election campaign in Delhi, we had a minister in the Narendra Modi government calling for traitors to be shot. Then we had another member of the ruling BJP, Kapil Mishra, saying that it's a battle between India and Pakistan. So there was a lot of hatred being created among Hindus against these Muslim protesters. So the violence can be traced to that. Also, incidentally, BJP did exceedingly well in the Delhi elections in the areas that eventually were hit by violence. In rest of the state, they did very poorly. So I think in some ways, the violence can be traced to the extremely shrill sectarian campaign run by BJP in the Delhi elections.
Right, one other point, Aditya, as we reported earlier on, there have been accusations that the police have been doing too little to stop this violence and in some instances have even been participating in it. What do you know about that?
I think there is substance to both these allegations. In many areas, there have been reports of distress calls being made every minute, mainly from Muslim localities, and the police doing nothing. But the police, in fact, did nothing even to save Hindus who were being attacked also. But in terms of police complicity in participating with the mob, that was almost exclusively against Muslims. There have been videos in which the police can be seen throwing stones at Muslims. In another video that surfaced, the police was beating up Muslim men who were already injured and making them forcibly chant the national anthem. One of those men ended up succumbing to his injuries. Is a boy called Faizan. He died eventually. His family says it is because of the torture done by the police against him. So there has been enough substance for the there have been enough details to show that the police was in fact extremely partisan. It was involved in some of the violence against Muslims as well. And also now with around 1,600 people are detained, many of them are Muslims. So even now the police seems to be acting in a slightly partisan manner.
Yeah, and we should point out that the majority of people who have died are Muslims, but there have also been Hindus who have died in this violence. Lalit Jha, as we just heard, there's been some very heated rhetoric going around. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he sent out a tweet on February 26th in which he said, "Peace and harmony are central to our ethos. I appeal to my sisters and brothers in Delhi to maintain peace and brotherhood at all times. It is important that there is calm and normalcy is restored at the earliest." This was 3 days after the violence started. Why did it take so long for the Prime Minister to make this kind of statement?
It's for you to ask the Prime Minister why he took some about the question that you're asking. But I think the administration had taken steps to control the violence, which no one can defend this. No civilized person can defend what went in Delhi for those 3 days. But I think the police and the administration has taken much better efforts to control this. Look, what would have happened? You have seen those videos of hundreds and thousands of liters of acid, petrol bomb being thrown at the police. Police, in fact, have shown much more tolerance and patience as compared to the police of other countries. If you do a comparative study or play a game of what the police of other countries do in such situations, Indian police has had a much better patience, a much better role in controlling this violence than other parts of the world.
Salman, do you agree that all efforts have been made to stem this violence and that police have been very tolerant?
Well, first of all, let me also say, as by way of introduction, I'm also a member of the opposition Congress party, although I'm here in my personal capacity. You know, we talk a lot about the police, but ultimately the police answers to the executive. So it is, I think, not the full picture if you actually say, oh, the police did this or did not do this. I think ultimately the question is, what was the government of India doing? Because the government of India controls Delhi police, not the Delhi state government. I think it is clear from all accounts, including in India and media reports outside from international media reports, that the first few days the police was either not doing its job or looking away or actively participating in some cases in trying to, committing acts of violence. Those things need to be investigated. But I think, because I use a political angle to this, I think the police would not behave the way it did in the first few days if the government of India, the Home Minister of India, had basically said, we cannot have anything like this going on in Delhi. But I don't think that happened. I think maybe the Home Minister basically let things, unfold as they did. After 3 days, obviously the police got, there's a lot of criticism of the police. And I think after that, the government also understood the gravity of the situation. And I think at that point, I think things were brought more under control. But for the first few days, the police is, I would say the police did not do what it was supposed to do. It was not neutral always. Although, yes, the police also came under attack. There is no doubt about it. In fact, a police officer was also killed, unfortunately. But at the same time, a police has a responsibility to protect all citizens, regardless of their background. I don't think it happened in this case. It is shameful. It is very unfortunate, and that can have a very negative impact throughout the country. Because if people cannot trust institutions in India, that is dangerous for the country. And I hope that there is, to my mind, there should be a Supreme Court monitored, independent investigation of what happened. There should be a commission of inquiry, and then maybe we can come to terms as to what has happened, because ultimately people have to live together. Yes, there were riots. Yes, in some ways, it can be, some people call it a pogrom. Yeah. But ultimately, you also saw these times where Hindus and Muslims were protecting each other.
Right.
They may not have been that many, but they were. those are the seeds that we need to grow, and that is what we can latch on to.
Well, there have been instances of Hindus coming to the rescue of Muslim homes that were being attacked.
Yes, and that is what gives us hope.
Right.
That Hindus and Muslims protecting each other, living, because they lived in the city for so long, like brothers and sisters.
Okay.
But clearly there is a divisive narrative in India, I think, unfortunately, by the ruling establishment, and I think we need to fight back against that.
Irfan, what is your view on what is taking place right now? Now, here we have a country, India, which has for a long time prided itself on its secular democracy, but are we seeing what's driving this deep polarization?
The pride in secular democracy is actually something that has been under dispute. Because really the question is, what does it mean to be a secular country in the context of India? For the founders, arguably, it meant that the state would support all religions so that they could all flourish. But for the Hindu right, this has been a bone of contention, suggesting that some communities have been appeased, have sort of received preferential treatment, and that in fact the majority population has been discriminated against, sort of an argument of reverse discrimination. It's not one that I have any sympathy for, that argument, but that is the narrative that has fueled the rise of the BJP. It has very much been the narrative that Mr. Modi and his ministers and his members of his party have sort of indulged in. And so the question is really that for not all members of the political establishment is the idea of secularism equally understood or equally valued. In fact, for some would have argued, I mean, the common parlance on Twitter is to actually refer to people as secular, S-I-C-K-U-L-A-R, as an insult, right? As all of, I imagine Salman, Lalit, and I would be quickly accused of secular if we have suggested that secularism should be this principle around which the Indian state should be organized. There's a couple of points that have been raised that I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of. The police's role in this, they lost the fight when on Sunday, when Kapil Mishra in Delhi, with the President of the United States about to arrive for a state visit, made a speech effectively saying, we'll wait till the President leaves and then we'll teach these people a lesson. And there was no proactive policing. Once there is a riot at which the police are under attack, innocent people in a very crowded, densely populated area, right, guns, petrol bombs, etc., the police are on a back foot. The real question to be asked is, why was it possible for a member of the ruling party to make such an incendiary speech, an overt threat, with no active policing? And this is, in fact, the question that the Delhi High Court asked. They played Mishra's speech and asking the police to answer to, why is it that when this man made the speech, nothing was done?
In front of a senior police officer.
In front of a senior police officer. And I think that is really the question. It is not, in some sense, second-guessing whether the police did it exactly right in the days when the violence had broken out, is missing the point that there has been a culture now in Delhi in which senior members of the government are making speeches in the presence of other senior members of the government. The Home Minister's rallies also were accompanied with speeches and calls for shooting the traitors, etc. And nothing is done there. That then allows for the sparks to flame. There's 3 days of violence. Lots of innocent people lose their lives. Lots of people lose their livelihoods. They lose their homes. And then we come back to normal. But the real root cause of it is never addressed.
Right. Aditya, this is a name that we've heard pretty often in our reporting, Kapil Mishra. He's the leader of the BJP. He has made very incendiary statements, as we've just heard. India Today reported that he's been accused actually of hate speech. In fact, some of his statements have been so incendiary that the BJP itself has distanced itself from what he has said. Who is he and what role has he been playing in this unrest?
Kapil Mishra is in fact quite a recent entrant into the BJP. He was part of the opposition Aam Aadmi Party, which claims to be a secular party. But he fell out with the Aam Aadmi Party and joined the BJP. And ever since he joined the BJP, he has been playing to a certain gallery, catering to an extremely bigoted section of the right wing, not even the entire right wing. And Kapil Mishra has, I mean, right from the beginning of the Delhi election campaign, Kapil Mishra said that the Delhi elections are a battle between India and Pakistan. He called the Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal a terrorist. A lot of things,
right.
a lot of very, very sectarianly charged, communally charged allegations were made by Kapil Mishra.
Okay.
He lost the elections, and he was on the verge of being kicked out of the BJP, but he's used this to emerge as the main face of the BJP in Delhi.
Okay, Aditya, I want to get on to something else, and that is India's National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval. He visited some of the neighborhoods where this violence took place in Delhi. This is what he had to say. Let's listen.
All the communities are cooperating. There is no need for fear. We have deployed enough security forces. They are alert and doing their job with complete diligence.
So what is your assessment right now? The deployment of the police and the paramilitary, has that changed anything?
Firstly, it was quite curious to see the National Security Advisor jump into what should be a law and order issue for the local police. So it was curious why it was the National Security Advisor and not the Home Minister Amit Shah who made that call. So that itself was a slightly strange thing that was done. The deployment of paramilitary forces did improve things to a great extent, especially because the police was unable to handle what was an extremely explosive communal situation in Delhi. So things did improve after that, but I think a lot more needed to be done. A lot of Muslim families have been displaced from their homes. Around thousands are living in relief camps across Delhi. So I think not enough is being done on that front.
Go ahead.
The issue with the NSA Doval's speech is not to question whether or not once the paramilitary was sent out, whether peace would now be maintained, right? The fear that minorities face in India today is that they will have to wait 3 days before the situation hits the front pages of the New York Times and the Washington Post, of the BBC, of the print of Hindu, of the Indian Express, before the NSA or before the Home Minister makes the speeches. But in those 3 days, people will die, people will get beaten up, they'll be killed. And so right now we are in a situation, this is not just today. I mean, to be quite blunt, it's been a situation for the last 50 years in India, where the inability to prevent things before they occur means that minorities have to live in fear because you don't know whether your house will be attacked on day 1 of the riot or whether you'll be lucky enough to wait to survive till day 5, at which point finally peace and order will be installed. This happened in Bombay in January '93, where for 3 days the city burned, thousands of Muslims and others were killed. It happened in 2002 in Gujarat. Of course, it famously happened horrifically, shamelessly in '84 in Delhi in the pogrom against Sikhs then. That, I think, is really the fear. It's not that India eventually gets it right. 3 days later, there's peace and security and this country returns to normal, or at least a sense of normalcy. But for the folks who live in these neighborhoods that are prone to this violence, they know that the next time it happens, it'll take 3 days before normalcy comes. And in those three days, their lives can change on a dime.
Right, Ali, the accusation here is that the government drags its feet when we have this kind of violence, this kind of sectarian violence. Is there something to that?
Look, first I'd like to say there is no amount of hate speech can be a justification for violence by any, and these are basically goons who indulge in this violence, right? There's always a slip between the freedom of speech and the hate speech, but anyone who does that hate speech doesn't give you the license or the goons the license to start hitting people with petrol bombs and start attacking people or kill people, right? So it also has to be looked at from a perspective of law and order. The day the police and the administration starts looking from this, not from a religion perspective, from a law and order perspective, things will start getting much better clear. And also the judiciary also has to play an important role into it. Why is the 1984 riots victims are still having to get justice from them, right? Those who were involved in the 1984 riots are still, only few of them had gone behind the bars, right? So these two players also has to play an important role. When it comes into politics, they create an environment, right? They create an environment of ecosystem of good things or bad things, or hate speech or welcoming environment in the country. That's what.
But what I'm hearing here is that there has been a failure on the part of the government to take very vigorous, decisive action when this violence starts.
Yes, sir, that has been happening the last 70 years, just immediately after partition, when millions of people were disrooted from both sides of the border. It has happened systematically. He has mentioned all of these. But you have to look at it from the perspective of law and order and administration perspective. Only then you have to improve the professionalism of the police. Like, even leave this incident in Delhi, even if my village, if someone is, there's some untoward incident happens with a female member of my village, there's no one to record their FIR to that, right? So that kind of sense of professionalism has to come there. But overall, in Delhi, the police administration has played a much better role than the police administration of other countries would have played at that particular point of time.
Salman, just going back a little bit to look at the origins of this violence, we heard earlier on the Citizenship Act. What exactly is that act, and how does it impact India?
Well, this is an act basically that the government got through Parliament recently. Basically, it's about refugees who are in India pre-2014, December 31st, 2014, who are essentially non-Muslims, would be granted citizenship on an expedited basis. So the opposition to this act is basically driven by the fact that there are two things. One is, in the Constitution, citizenship cannot be accorded based on religion. So that's one thing, but the Supreme Court has to decide on that. But the second part, which is actually fed this fire, is the Home Minister basically asserting that there's a chronology to all of this. There's going to be a Citizenship Amendment Act, which is this act which has been passed, which grants non-Muslim citizenship if they're refugees from Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh. Then there's going to be a National Register of Citizens that will be created. And in that, basically, they can say that, officials will say, this person is a doubtful citizen. And then that person will have to basically go around collecting documents and papers and all that. And if you are a non-Muslim, you're declared a foreigner, you could, under this act, become a citizen, whereas the others who are Muslims, who would be possibly undocumented, would not have the same kind of rights. Now, that creates a lot of fear because in India, many people, I think most people, do not have documents to prove their citizenship. So, so people are fearful that the ruling establishment is actually using these two laws together. The second one is not a law yet. It's just that they're saying that they're going to do it, the National Register of Citizens. But if you combine these two, and that is what the Home Minister has said. He said there's a chronology to this. The Citizenship Amendment Act comes first, then comes the Population Register, and then comes the National Register of Citizens. When you combine them, then of course Muslims will say, you know what, this is possibly a way of disenfranchising us, taking our citizenship away, because the BJP, let's face it, has clearly been very...
Does the law explicitly apply a religious test?
Yes, I mean, the Citizenship Amendment Act basically says that if you are a Sikh, Hindu, Christian, Buddhist, or Jain from Bangladesh, Pakistan, or Afghanistan, and if you were in India before December 31st, 2014, you can apply for expedited citizenship.
And wouldn't that be a violation of the Constitution?
That is what we think, but the Supreme Court has to, weigh in on that. And I think, but that by itself, first of all, of course, there could be many arguments against this and say, why don't you give Ahmadi Pakistanis, they're Muslim, but they're persecuted in Pakistan. Why not grant them the citizenship? Why not Hazaras from Afghanistan? Why not, why do you not talk about Rohingyas in Burma? Then why not talk about Tamils in Sri Lanka? So I think the fear is that this is targeted at Muslims. The reason being that the BJP has clearly shown that it doesn't really see Muslims as equal citizens, and that is, and if you look at just this particular riot, right? I mean, you have a minister in the government of Prime Minister Modi, who basically says, shoot the traitors. If the Prime Minister wants, and Prime Minister is by far the most popular, he's the most popular leader in India, right? He's the strongest leader in India. If he says once that I will not tolerate this, because this goes against the ethos of what India is about, this goes against my commitments to the people of India and to the world, nobody would dare say anything. The reason they say these things is because they know there's a permissive environment.
Okay. Lalit, do you agree with that assessment?
No, you are from the Congress party, and you must also note, I'm not from the BJP, but also note those kind of words or language that are being used, that has been an ecosystem environment in the country. When no court of India has said anything about Prime Minister Modi, what was the need of the top leader of your party to say someone as Maut ka Saudagar, right? Wasn't it Maut ka Saudagar being used by one of your leaders, top leaders, against the Prime Minister, where no court of the land has said that he's accused of it?
I think,
right?
I think we are now.
So
I think
I'll go into the domain of freedom of speech.
Okay.
I'll let that speech go into the freedom of speech. Also, this into the realm of freedom of speech. But no freedom of speech should be used as a license for violence.
No, Lalit, one thing is that we should not, in this day and age, indulge in whataboutery. If you're talking about Mrs. Sonia Gandhi and what she said about, she called him basically a salesman.
Was it a civilized way of saying Maut ka Saudagar?
I'm just saying that here you have. You can, I can say Lalit is a bad person, or I can call you names, you can call me names. Yeah. But if I say things which basically incite violence against other people, which in the case of the Minister of State for Finance was clear, shoot the traitors. Who are the traitors? And a member of parliament saying, these people will come to rape your girls. That is a very different, that is, in my view, hate speech that incites violence.
All right.
That is not about calling somebody or the Prime Minister. I mean,
I'm using a term, saying that only responsible leaders shouldn't use those terms.
No, no, but I understand.
I'm making that point. Responsible leaders from your party also. If it happens the BJP, CPI, CPM, Aam Aadmi Party, any party, no responsible leaders should use those words.
All right, I want to move on. Irfan, I want to move on to something else, Irfan, and that is the politics behind this. There was a study carried out by researchers at Yale University. They examined this communal violence in India from 1962 to 2000, and they found that when there was violence, there was more support for the BJP and its share of the vote. So I'm wondering, is there much political incentive then to bring down this level of violence?
Not really. I mean, as long as there's the impunity enjoyed by both the perpetrators of the violence and those who instigate them, there's very little incentive. The study that you cite from Yale essentially refers to violence and riots as a campaign investment, right? And the finding reported then and replicated in other studies is that when a BJP MLA is elected, MLA is a member of the Legislative Assembly, so at the state level, the risk of a religiously oriented, I don't think these are religious violence, this is violence, right? It's mob violence, but under this Hindu-Muslim kind of gamut, increases quite dramatically, right? And there's a couple of different mechanisms. One of it is that you force Muslims out of those communities, right? They leave because they're no longer safe. So you get a ghettoization. Gujarat is one of the more religiously segregated states in the country as we speak, right? As a result, I think, of 2002 and the climate around that. So absolutely, there is very little political incentive. The FIR, this is a term of art in India. There's a first incident report. There's a lot will be announced that, a number of FIRs have been filed. The real question is whether any of the people filed will ever see the inside of a jail cell. It didn't occur in '84, 35 years later. It's not going to happen now either. And that impunity means that there's very little incentive to do the right thing.
All right, I've just got about a minute left, and I want to get the last word from Aditya Menon in Delhi. Aditya, what is the situation right now in Delhi and other parts of India? Has the situation been brought under control?
As of now, there hasn't been any violence for the last 3-4 days in Delhi, so that's at least a good development. But a large number of Muslims were displaced from their homes, so that's something that still needs to be addressed. Then no one has yet been, no one from the majority community or any of the people involved in rioting have been arrested as yet. So there's the question of justice. Around 2/3 of the people killed in the riots are Muslims. Much of the economic establishments targeted belong to Muslims. Homes that were targeted largely belong to Muslims. Yet those behind it haven't been arrested, haven't been detained. So there's a question that's being asked is that this government seems to be incentivizing hatred, incentivizing religious violence. So that's an extremely fundamental question that is going to be asked from this government in the days to come.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching. Hello everybody, I'm Anand Naidu. If you enjoy the thoughtful, engaged discussions you see on The Heat, you may also want to subscribe to our podcast. It's appropriately titled The Heat. Twice a week we take a deep dive on world headlines, talking to experts, journalists and others. It's a fresh, focused and intimate look at the issues that matter most. Whether it's the Hong Kong riots, the latest Middle East conflict or US politics, The Heat podcast gives the clear context needed to understand both what's going on and why. And what's best, we come to you. Whether you're at home or on the go, you can find The Heat podcast just about anywhere podcasts are found. Just search The Heat CGTN. Have a listen today and subscribe. Thanks.